Hey, how you guys doing? We're going to do another comparison today, comparing an NX600 1988 model to, let's just say, an early 90s XR650L. I think those would be a very fair comparison, and then very comparable to a video I did a while back on the Kawasaki's, where we looked at the KLX versus the KLR 650s. If you look at those two bikes, one's a little bit more street oriented, one's a little bit more dirt oriented, and we kind of have the same case here where this one, the NX650 is a little bit more street oriented and the XR650L is a little bit more dirt oriented, which is something to consider when you're looking at dual sport bikes. So let's get into it and talk about the NX650 versus the XR650L. So again, this is a 1988 model, as you can see here on the badge. These were only made for 2 years for the US market, but continued all the way to 2003 for more European, Australian markets. It was known just as the NX650 in the US, but had the name Dominator in the non-US markets, and again was made all the way up till 03. As far as engine is concerned, comparing it to the XR650L, very similar, 8.3 compression ratio, 4-valve overhead cam engines, both mated to 5-speed transmissions. Now, I couldn't find specs on the gearing, but my understanding is the NX gearing is a little bit more evenly spaced, not as big jumps going from second to third as the XR650L. But again, both 650s, both 5-speed transmissions. Both have electric starters, neither have kickstart for backup. Now you'd have to get into your XR650Rs or your XR600s for kickstart, and neither of those had electric start. So I've always thought this would be a good engine to move over to XR600, XR650 frame, and then you'd have that electric start and modernize it. And especially if you had the NX transmission, then you'd have a little bit better gearing for off-road. Max power for both bikes is 45 horsepower and 53 Newton meters torque. The frames are a little bit different, which comes into play with the wheelbase. As much as you think these bikes would be similar, outside of the engine, there's a lot of differences. The frame's different, the wheelbase is different, and we'll get into that. The first place you see the differences is when we start talking about the suspension. The NX has 41 millimeter non-adjustable forks, whereas the XR650 had 16-way adjustable Showa 43 millimeter shocks. The front wheel travel is only 8.6 inches on the NX, whether it's 11.6 inches on the XR650L. Both the NX and 650 have the ProLink rear swing arms, but it is a Kayaba fully adjustable rear shock on the XR650, and it does not seem to be really anything adjustable on this shock. It does have a linkage to it, but I'm not even really seeing a collar. Yeah, well, I guess there's a preload adjustment, and that's about it on the NX650. Suspension travel is 11 inches on the XR, but only 7.6 inches on the NX. Front brakes, both of them have disc brakes. The NX actually has a little bit bigger front caliper, 256 millimeters, while only 240 on the XR650. The rear brakes is where we have some major differences. Let's start out with the XR650. It's a 240 millimeter single piston caliper. But on the rear brakes, it depends on whether you're talking about US or European models. So it's on the early US models, the 88s, they were just a drum brake, and the European models had a 220 millimeter disc. You'd have to get into the 89 model in the US market to get rear disc brakes. Another area of difference is the tires. Now they both have a 21-inch front wheel, but the NX only has a 17-inch rear, whereas the XR has a more off-road friendly 18-inch rear. Wheelbase is a little bit shorter on the NX at 56.4 inches. XR650L is 57.3, so almost a full inch longer wheelbase on the XR. Seat height's also a lot different, only 34.3 inches, so the NX is better for a shorter rider, whereas you're at 37 inches on an XR650L. And likewise, the ground clearance is affected by that, only 9.8 inches on the NX, and you got a full 13 inches of ground clearance on the XR650L. Dry weight's a lot different. On the NX, 359.3 and only 324 on the XR650L. Probably a lot of that you can't see on this bike, as the original version of the NX has more of a full, I wouldn't call it a full fairing, but a mini fairing, and kind of a different gas tank and stuff than you see in this model here. This model here that I bought is more scramblerized, or a scrambler model, scrambled. So it's a little bit different, but there was a lot more plastic involved in the original version of the NX650 in the American market. Final spec I wanted to go over, actually a couple more. Fuel capacity is 4.2 gallons on the NX, but only 2.8 on the XR. So this one can go farther. And I don't have these specs for the XR, but they tested the NX at a quarter mile of 13.9 seconds and a top speed of 100 mile an hour, which I would assume is tire rating limited. The only thing else that the specs don't really bring out is the NX actually has dual exhaust from the factory. 2 pipes coming out the back. Of course, your XRs only have one, but otherwise the performance is very similar. And I'm curious as to why they did that, because that again added some weight on those dry weight rating differences, making the NX much heavier. So with all that said, again, I think this is a good correlation to the KLR, and the XR is a little bit better correlation to the KLX from Kawasaki. That being said, the XR has done way better in the market over the years, virtually unchanged. It's still being made, and the KLX was just recently changed over to a fuel injection bike. So these are kind of the grandfathers of those 2 popular models that are still made today. So with that, I'm going to go for a little ride and take you along and see how she does on the road and in a little bit of dirt. All right, let's get this thing out here and see what she'll do. It's a nice fall day here in Kentucky. All right, first we got to get the fuel turned on. It looks like it's on. Get the key on. There's a little bit of choke here involved. Put it on run. Oh yeah, no problem there. Looks like we got our headlight working. Just go ahead and check all of our lights. Those left turn signals. That's working. Signals working. I think we're good there. Get that dual exhaust. Cancel. Alright. So we got foot pegs for the passenger and then foot pegs for the driver. Bike has 22,500 miles on it. Horn works. 65 mile an hour is good enough on knobbies. Off-road. One thing with this low seat height, it's not very scary to try things. I don't know if I'd really call this a wheelie monster, not with the current gearing. Now I can pop a wheelie. Isn't terrible. I'm brave enough to set that up or not. Now it kind of likes to roll. Interstate, windshield. Alright, not too bad. Did I break anything? Nope. Tires are still happy. Forks are happy. Yeah, that wasn't too bad at all. I don't know if I'd want to hair scramble it or not, but it's got the power. It's probably got like a 48 tooth sprocket on it though. I'd need to put about a 50 on there, 52. Gear it down a little bit because first gear's a little bit fast on it. But anyway, nice old bike.